Welcome, history enthusiasts, to another fascinating journey into the past. Today we're diving deep into the realm of royalty, but not the crown jewels or lavish feasts. No, today we're exploring something a bit more unexpected: the strange and often shocking hygiene practices of royals throughout history. Despite their opulent surroundings and access to the finest luxuries, many monarchs had hygiene habits that might make you cringe, or maybe even make you thankful for modern conveniences. Imagine a royal court bustling with activity, where the finest silks and gold adorn the wealthy and powerful. But amidst this splendor, hygiene, something we often take for granted today, wasn't always a priority. Despite having access to fountains of water, fragrant oils, and attendants at their beck and call, many royals were just as prone to peculiar hygiene rituals as they were to wearing the finest garments and dining on extravagant dishes. From bathing practices that might seem downright bizarre to their odd beliefs about cleanliness, the history of royal hygiene is as captivating as it is unsettling. In many parts of the world, royalty held the highest standards, both in their appearance and in their perceived purity. But what many don't realize is that while some kings and queens were obsessed with cleanliness, others were, well, not so much, and their peculiar practices were often the result of superstition, tradition, or even ignorance about basic health and hygiene. Let's take a brief step back in time to understand how hygiene was perceived in different eras. Over the centuries, as societies evolved, so did their understanding of cleanliness. In ancient civilizations, cleanliness was tied closely to religious and social beliefs. The Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, and Persians had complex systems for bathing and grooming. However, as time wore on, and especially in the Middle Ages, hygiene took a back seat to other matters such as survival or warfare. Royals in particular often relied on personal servants and elaborate rituals to keep themselves looking pristine, but their methods were not always the most hygienic. As we move into the Renaissance, the dawn of the Enlightenment and beyond, royals began to implement more sophisticated hygiene routines. Yet even in these times, there were still practices that today's modern sensibilities would find absolutely shocking. Despite having the best resources available, royal hygiene often relied on superstition, strange remedies, or odd rituals that we'd find difficult to imagine today. What did these royal figures actually do when it came to hygiene? Well, prepare yourself for some rather bizarre stories. From queens who bathed in wine to emperors who had their own bath rituals with unconventional methods, the hygiene habits of royalty were as varied as they were strange. You'll hear about monarchs who, despite their wealth, neglected cleanliness entirely, while others took cleanliness to a whole new, often ridiculous level. Whether it was using perfume to mask body odor instead of bathing, or believing in the magical powers of certain substances for cleanliness, these royals definitely had some unorthodox practices. We're about to explore these eccentricities, so sit back and get ready to be both shocked and amused as we venture into the weird world of royal hygiene. How did they manage to maintain their divine cleanliness, and what were the consequences of their strange practices? Before we dive in, if you're enjoying our historical deep dives, make sure to like, share, and comment below. I'd love to know which royal hygiene habit you found the most shocking or even the most disgusting. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a fascinating historical journey like this one. Now, let's step into the past and explore the bizarre hygiene habits of royalty. In the vast expanse of the Mongol Empire, where the winds of the steppes howled through the great plains and mountains, one thing stood out above all else: Genghis Khan's singular obsession with water. To the nomadic Mongol tribes, water was more than just a necessity. It was a precious resource, vital to both survival and strength. And Genghis Khan, in his relentless pursuit of power and order, recognized this. He was a man who would not leave the fate of his empire to chance, especially when it came to the life-giving force of water. Genghis Khan's empire stretched across much of Asia, encompassing vast swaths of land that included rivers, lakes, and distant wells. His Mongol warriors, famed for their speed and strategic prowess, required vast amounts of water to sustain them on their campaigns. The Mongols, being a nomadic people, had always been highly attuned to the resources around them. But under Genghis Khan, this respect for water grew into an obsession. For Genghis, water was not simply a tool of survival, but a sacred gift. His love for water was so profound that he instituted stringent rules regarding its use, rules that would seem harsh, even tyrannical, to anyone outside his empire. Yet they were rules that reflected his deep understanding of both the resource's value and the crucial need to protect it from contamination. As Genghis Khan expanded his empire, he made sure that water sources such as rivers, lakes, and wells were treated with the utmost respect. The concept of using water efficiently was ingrained in the Mongol way of life. Genghis believed that water had to be treated with reverence, both because it was so rare in the harsh landscapes of the Mongol Empire, and because it was so essential to the survival of his army and people. One of the most peculiar, even bizarre regulations Genghis Khan enforced was the practice of putting water in one's mouth before using it to wash hair. This seemingly odd ritual was designed to purify the water before it was used on the body. The Mongols, with their deep sense of respect for cleanliness, were convinced that by first rinsing water through their mouths, they could cleanse it of impurities and ensure it wouldn't spread illness or disease. The idea behind this was simple. Water could easily become contaminated by the hands, especially in an army where soldiers and horses drank from the same sources. Thus, by purifying the water before use, Genghis Khan hoped to minimize any potential risks. It wasn't just about the washing, though. The Mongol ruler took the conservation of water one step further by implementing a policy so severe that it could cost a person their life. If anyone, be it a soldier or a common villager, was caught contaminating a water source, the penalty was death. To some, this might have seemed extreme, even barbaric. But for Genghis Khan, it was a matter of survival. The cleanliness and purity of water directly impacted the health of his empire and his army. Contaminating water could lead to outbreaks of illness, which in turn could weaken his military and jeopardize his conquest of the known world. One particular incident stands out in history, a testament to the ruthless efficiency with which Genghis Khan enforced his laws. During one of his campaigns, a small group of Mongol soldiers, weary from battle, made camp near a fresh water source. After a long day's march, they washed their horses, their bodies, and their cooking utensils in the same water source. Unknown to them, they had violated one of the strictest rules set forth by their leader. The water, once pristine, was now tainted. When Genghis Khan heard of the incident, his reaction was swift and unforgiving. The soldiers involved were dragged before him and without ceremony were executed for their carelessness. This harsh punishment sent a clear message throughout the entire Mongol Empire. Water was sacred, and those who failed to respect it would pay the ultimate price. The Mongol Empire, at its peak, stretched across vast distances from the steppes of Mongolia to the heart of China-Persia and the Middle East. For Genghis Khan and his successors, ensuring a constant supply of clean water was essential to maintaining control over such an enormous empire. The nomadic lifestyle of the Mongols required them to move frequently, which meant that they had to rely heavily on their ability to access clean water at all times. The Mongols were resourceful when it came to finding water. They built sophisticated systems to transport water from distant sources to their encampments, ensuring that their soldiers' horses and livestock had access to the essential liquid. Wells, springs, and rivers became lifelines in the empire, and Genghis Khan made sure that his army could quickly secure these resources during their travels. Perhaps even more impressive than the Mongols' ability to find and transport water was their capacity to protect it. Genghis Khan understood that water wasn't just a personal resource, it was a military one. By safeguarding his army's water supply, he ensured that disease wouldn't spread and that his soldiers would remain strong and healthy for battle. Water, after all, was not just essential for survival, it was crucial for victory. His obsession with cleanliness and water conservation didn't just end with military campaigns. Genghis Khan's policies had a lasting impact on the way his empire was structured. He implemented systems for public water management that included aqueducts, wells, and irrigation systems that allowed for agricultural production in some of the harshest climates. By focusing on water conservation and cleanliness, Genghis Khan helped secure the longevity of his empire. He knew that an empire could not thrive if its people were sick or weakened by poor sanitation. Water was the foundation upon which everything else depended. Without it, his conquests would have faltered, and the Mongol Empire would not have been able to sustain itself over such vast distances. In the end, Genghis Khan's strict water regulations, though harsh, were part of a larger vision for the empire. His policies not only ensured the health and survival of his soldiers, but also contributed to the overall longevity of the empire. By understanding the vital importance of water, Genghis Khan was able to maintain control over his vast domain, preventing disease and allowing his military to stay strong in their campaigns. The Mongols' emphasis on water conservation and cleanliness is a testament to Genghis Khan's strategic genius. It's a story of how a seemingly mundane resource became one of the most vital elements of his empire's success. Genghis Khan's obsession with water wasn't just about keeping his army hydrated, it was about ensuring that his people remained strong, healthy, and capable of defending the largest contiguous empire in history. Through these strict regulations, Genghis Khan left a legacy of health and resilience, proving that even in the harshest of environments, with the right policies and practices, an empire could thrive. The Mongol Empire, a vast and powerful force that stretched across Asia and into Europe, was built on the tenacity and cunning of Genghis Khan. The Mongols were known for their military prowess and their ability to adapt and innovate in almost every aspect of life. This innovation extended to their approach to health and medicine, especially when it came to ailments like gout, a condition that caused severe pain and swelling in the joints, often in the feet. The Mongols, who valued strength and resilience, didn't have modern doctors or medicine at their disposal. so they turned to unusual and sometimes grotesque remedies. One of the most bizarre of these was the treatment for gout, which involved sticking the afflicted foot into the chest of a dead horse. This remedy, both strange and unsettling to modern sensibilities, was believed to draw out the toxins from the body, alleviating the pain caused by gout. While today, gout is treated with medications like nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs, and uric acid-lowering drugs, the Mongols had no such options. Instead, they relied on what was available to them, using their creativity and resourcefulness to find solutions, even if those solutions were far from conventional. This strange practice of using the chest of a dead horse to treat gout was rooted in the Mongols' belief in the power of nature and their willingness to experiment with whatever was available. The chest of a dead animal, still warm with the heat of life, was thought to provide a kind of therapeutic warmth that would soothe the pain of gout. The idea behind this practice was that the heat and pressure from the horse's chest would draw out the toxins causing the gout, much like a modern-day hot compress or poultice might. It was an unscientific, yet effective way to alleviate the pain, especially in a time when understanding of disease and the body was limited. For the Mongols, the dead horse was just another tool in their vast array of natural remedies, which also included herbs, acupuncture, and other more conventional treatments. Though this remedy might seem grotesque by today's standards, it was a reflection of the Mongols' pragmatic and resourceful approach to medicine. In the absence of modern healthcare, the Mongols turned to the natural world, finding solutions in their environment, no matter how unconventional. The practice of sticking a foot into a dead horse's chest was just one example of the lengths to which the Mongols would go in their efforts to alleviate suffering. And while modern medicine has rendered such practices obsolete, it's interesting to look back at how the Mongols used their environment and their resources to address medical issues in a time of limited knowledge. While this treatment may seem barbaric today, it's important to remember that the Mongols, like many other ancient cultures, didn't have the benefit of scientific understanding or modern medicine. They relied on what worked, even if they didn't fully understand why it worked. The dead horse chest treatment was in its own way an example of this trial and error approach to healthcare, where anything that could relieve pain was worth trying. In a time when medical knowledge was rudimentary, the Mongols were willing to experiment with any remedy, no matter how strange or unorthodox it seemed. Beyond the use of dead horses, the Mongols also used a variety of herbs and natural remedies to treat gout and other ailments. Safflower angelica root and other herbs were commonly used to alleviate pain and reduce inflammation, and acupuncture, which the Mongols likely borrowed from Chinese medicine, was also employed to treat a wide range of conditions. These treatments, though primitive by modern standards, were often based on observations of nature and the human body, and some of them continue to be used in alternative medicine today. The Mongols were not alone in their use of herbal remedies and alternative treatments. Many ancient cultures relied on similar methods to manage pain and illness. However, the dead horse chest remedy stands out for its sheer oddity and the extremity of its practice. The Mongols' approach to health was deeply intertwined with their environment, and they believed that the natural world had the power to heal. This belief was reflected not only in their medical practices, but also in their culture and way of life. The Mongols' close relationship with animals, for example, meant that they often used animal parts and fluids in their remedies. The use of the dead horse for gout treatment was just one example of how the Mongols integrated their understanding of the natural world into their healthcare practices. In modern times, gout is treated with medication, lifestyle changes, and dietary adjustments. Doctors now understand that gout is caused by the buildup of uric acid in the body, leading to the formation of crystals in the joints. Treatments focus on reducing inflammation and lowering uric acid levels. But in the days of the Mongols, medical knowledge was limited, and treatments were often based on superstition, trial, and error. The dead horse chest remedy, though unconventional, was a reflection of the Mongols' creativity and their willingness to experiment with whatever resources were available. While the practice of using a dead horse to treat gout may seem strange and horrifying to us today, it's important to remember that it was a product of its time. The Mongols, like other ancient peoples, did the best they could with the resources they had, and their medical practices were shaped by their environment, culture, and the knowledge available to them. The dead horse chest remedy is a reminder of the lengths to which people will go in their pursuit of health and wellness, and how far we've come in our understanding of the human body and disease. Today, the idea of using a dead animal's body to treat gout seems grotesque and barbaric. But in the context of the Mongol Empire, it was a practical and resourceful solution to a painful problem. The Mongols were pioneers in many ways, from their military strategies to their use of natural remedies, and their unconventional approach to healthcare is just one example of their ability to adapt and innovate. While modern medicine has replaced many of the Mongols' remedies, the lessons of their ingenuity and resourcefulness remain, reminding us of the importance of creativity and adaptability in the face of adversity. The Mongols' use of the dead horse chest for treating gout is one of the more bizarre practices in the history of medicine. Yet it serves as a testament to the Mongols' ability to make use of the resources around them in a time of limited knowledge. While the practice may seem strange to us today, it was a product of its time, and in its own way, it worked to alleviate the suffering of those afflicted with gout. The dead horse chest, along with other Mongol remedies, demonstrates the creativity, adaptability, and resourcefulness that allowed the Mongol Empire to thrive in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Mary, Queen of Scots, known for her turbulent reign and tragic fate, lived during an era when both politics and personal indulgence went hand in hand. But among the many eccentricities that defined her royal life, perhaps none was as peculiar or as luxurious as her penchant for bathing in wine. At a time when the majority of the population struggled with basic hygiene practices, the Queen of Scotland took luxury and extravagance to a whole new level. Her baths, unlike those of most of her subjects, were a lavish indulgence that combined personal care with a heavy dose of royal ritual. The idea of bathing in wine is by today's standards quite bizarre, yet Mary's choice was not as outlandish as it may seem when viewed through the lens of the time. As a devout Catholic, she was deeply influenced by the symbolism of the wine in her faith, most notably the blood of Christ. The ritual of drinking wine during communion was central to the Catholic Mass, and it is possible that she saw her wine baths as a way to spiritually cleanse herself, connecting her physical purity to her religious devotion. This act of ritualistic cleansing by immersing herself in wine could have also been an expression of Mary's devotion to her faith, intertwining her personal rituals with her role as a sovereign in a turbulent religious and political landscape. The appeal of wine was not limited to its symbolic religious significance. The therapeutic qualities of wine were well known to Mary's contemporaries, and it was not uncommon for the royal class to indulge in various types of wine-based treatments. In the 16th century, many believed that wine could rejuvenate the skin, rejuvenate the body, and promote overall health. In fact, the concept of using wine for beauty and health treatments is not entirely outdated. Today, there exists something known as wine therapy in spas around the world. In these modern settings, wine is often used for its antioxidants, which are believed to fight aging and improve skin health by neutralizing free radicals. Just as Mary soaked in the luxurious red liquid, today's spa-goers indulge in wine facials or wine baths, basking in the belief that the antioxidants in wine can help rejuvenate and refresh their skin. But for Mary, it was far more than just skin deep. These wine baths were a reflection of the Queen's desire for self-care and luxury, a privilege afforded only to the elite. While Mary enjoyed the benefits of royal indulgence, the common folk lived under very different circumstances. For them, basic hygiene was a luxury they could barely afford. Bathing was a rare event, and many would only wash their hands and faces occasionally. The lack of running water and sanitation meant that most people had little access to even the simplest hygiene practices. Public baths, where they existed, were often dirty and overcrowded, far removed from the pristine, indulgent experience that Mary would have enjoyed in her private chambers. The Queen's wine baths were a glaring contrast to the grimy, overcrowded, and often unhealthy living conditions of her subjects. Mary's indulgence with wine baths also pointed to the excesses of royalty in general. At the time, monarchs had the luxury to treat their bodies as temples of indulgence showered with pampering and care that was reserved only for the highest echelons of society. While commoners were relegated to basic hygiene practices, often relying on rudimentary methods to clean their bodies, royals like Mary sought out the finest, most luxurious solutions available. The disparity between royal indulgence and the harsh realities of the common folk's hygiene is striking, and the notion of bathing in wine, an extravagant act, serves as a stark reminder of how differently the wealthy and the poor lived in Mary's time. Her baths, while certainly extravagant, were also a reflection of her personal connection to the rituals and practices of her Catholic faith. By immersing herself in wine, Mary may have been attempting to elevate her sense of personal sanctity. Her deeply religious beliefs likely imbued these rituals with greater meaning far beyond just the materialistic indulgence of royal luxury. In the context of her reign, which was marked by religious strife and political turmoil, such personal rituals may have been a form of solace and a way to maintain a sense of order and control over her life. However, despite the luxurious, almost otherworldly nature of Mary's wine baths, they also highlight a fascinating tension between opulence and practicality. While Mary soaked in wine, her subjects would have been struggling to keep clean, with little to no access to soap-clean water, or even basic bathing practices. Many of her contemporaries might have viewed her indulgences with a mixture of awe and disdain. To the common folk, the Queen's lavish personal care rituals must have seemed as distant and unattainable as the sun itself. It's a curious thing, the distance between the lived experiences of royalty and the people they rule over, and Mary's baths are a stark example of that divide. And yet there is something quite human in the desire for self-care and indulgence. Whether it's through wine therapy or the simple act of a warm bath, humans have always sought ways to nurture themselves. For Mary, the wine bath symbolized far more than just a royal indulgence. It was an act steeped in faith in personal health and in the desire to escape the pressures of her throne. For all her regal grandeur, she too was a woman of her time, seeking solace in the simplest of pleasures. The contrast between her lavish treatment and the harsh realities of the time speaks to the universality of human desire for well-being, no matter the era. Mary Queen of Scots wine baths were just one peculiar aspect of the luxurious, yet often strange habits of royalty throughout history. They reflect not only the excesses of the royal class, but also the deeply ingrained beliefs that shaped personal rituals. As strange as it may seem, these practices provide a window into the past, offering insights into the ways in which monarchs saw themselves, their bodies, and their role in society. And perhaps just as the common folk looked up at their queen with wonder, so too do we today marvel at the opulence and eccentricities of the past. Whether or not the practice of soaking in wine holds any merit in terms of health, it remains a fascinating chapter in the history of royal hygiene, a story of indulgence, faith, and the lengths to which people will go to seek comfort, even in the most unusual of ways. The Meiji Restoration in Japan, which began in 1868, marked the start of a monumental transformation in the nation's political, social, and cultural landscape. It was a time when Japan, once isolated from the rest of the world, opened its doors to Western influences, rapidly modernizing its systems of governance, technology, and lifestyle. Among the various imports that gained traction during this period, one of the more peculiar changes involved the adoption of soap, an item that, despite being commonplace in the West, had never truly penetrated Japanese society before. Before the Meiji era, Japanese hygiene practices were based on traditions that had evolved over centuries. Bathing, particularly in the form of the furo, a wooden bathtub filled with hot water, was a cornerstone of daily life for the nobility and upper classes. It was an essential ritual tied to both physical cleanliness and spiritual purity. But when Emperor Meiji took the throne, his fascination with Western culture led him to seek out not only new technologies and ideas, but also new ways of maintaining cleanliness. This fascination eventually led him to introduce the concept of soap to Japan, fundamentally altering the country's approach to personal hygiene. Emperor Meiji's decision to introduce soap to the Japanese nobility was not simply about improving cleanliness, but rather a deeper desire to bring Japan in line with the modern westernized world. During this time, the country was undergoing rapid industrialization, and the emperor wanted his court to reflect the sophistication of the nations Japan was beginning to emulate. Western hygiene, with its use of soap and other imported products, was viewed as part of the broader cultural exchange that was redefining Japan's identity. Japan needs to modernize to be recognized as a powerful nation on the world stage, the emperor reportedly said, a sentiment echoed by many of his advisors. Soap to him represented not only cleanliness, but progress, a symbol of a new era. The decision was revolutionary, as the Japanese had traditionally used oils and rice bran for cleaning their skin, preferring more natural, locally sourced methods. The use of soap was seen as a Western indulgence, an unnecessary luxury, and at first the nobility were hesitant to adopt the practice. But Emperor Meiji was determined. His court, ever eager to demonstrate loyalty and obedience to their emperor, soon began to incorporate soap into their daily rituals. The introduction of soap was viewed as a step forward, a mark of Japan's modernization, and a means of elevating the nobility's standing in the global community. Soap, with its rich lather and Western pedigree, became a symbol of refinement. The nobility embraced it eagerly, lathering up during their daily routines, while the common folk, who had long relied on the simpler, more rudimentary practices of oil and rice bran, watched from a distance, still unaccustomed to the new material. While soap became a staple for Japan's royal class, it wasn't immediately adopted by the masses. The majority of the population, particularly in rural areas, continued to practice their traditional methods of bathing and cleaning, which were far more practical and less costly. The introduction of soap was a luxury, an item that symbolized wealth status and access to modernity. Meanwhile, many in the lower classes couldn't afford the new luxury item. For them, oil and rice bran served as the go-to products for cleansing, and the use of soap remained a distant ideal reserved only for the elite. The contrast between the royal and common classes when it came to hygiene was stark. The emperor's court had access to the best hygiene practices thanks to the introduction of Western products like soap and perfumes. Nobles would cleanse their bodies with soap, using imported European fragrances to mask any odors that might arise during their daily routine. Meanwhile, the common folk were left to make do with the old ways, simple oils, water, and the occasional dip in a communal bath. One of the most notable hygiene practices of the Japanese nobility was their use of the furo, a wooden bathtub that became a symbol of personal hygiene and wellness. The furo was a large, deep tub filled with hot water, often used to relax the body and mind after a long day. It was not just a practical means of washing, it was a ceremony, a ritual that elevated the act of bathing to an art form. Nobles would soak in the furo for hours, using it not just to cleanse, but to restore balance and harmony to their bodies. The furo was an essential part of the royal lifestyle, especially during the reign of Emperor Meiji. The emperor himself took great pride in maintaining a high standard of personal hygiene and cleanliness. His court followed suit, carefully adhering to his rules and adopting new practices, including the regular use of soap, which had been imported from the West. Bathhouses, where the furo could be found, became popular social spaces where the nobility could come together to relax, socialize, and cleanse. These bathhouses were often decorated with intricate tilework and adorned with fine materials reflecting Japan's growing sense of sophistication during this period of transformation. While the nobility enjoyed these new practices, they were not immediately available to the lower classes. The peasants who lived in more humble circumstances could not afford the luxury of a furo or soap. For them, personal hygiene was a matter of practicality. If they bathed at all, it was in local rivers, ponds, or in crude wooden tubs that were not nearly as grand as those used by the royals. Soap was a foreign luxury, something they couldn't easily incorporate into their daily lives. Despite these disparities, the influence of Emperor Meiji's reforms began to ripple through Japanese society. Over time, the idea of cleanliness and personal care became more widely accepted, and even the common people began to adopt some of the practices that had once been reserved for the elite. Soap slowly trickled down from the palace to the market, and though it was still a costly luxury, it began to appear more frequently in homes. The nobility's influence had spread, and with it, the idea that cleanliness was not just about physical health, but also about social standing and modernity. Emperor Meiji's efforts to modernize Japan included far more than just hygiene. His reforms touched every part of society, from education to industry, and he sought to position Japan as a global power. The introduction of soap and other Western luxuries into the Japanese royal court was just one small part of a much larger transformation. But it was an important one, a symbol of Japan's growing sophistication, and an early indication of how Western practices would gradually find their way into Japanese culture. The emperor's obsession with cleanliness, along with the adoption of soap and other Western hygiene practices, marked a turning point in Japanese history. It represented not just a personal preference for cleanliness, but also an ideological shift toward modernization and westernization. The furo, once the epitome of traditional Japanese hygiene, began to coexist with the soap imported from Europe. The rituals of the royal court reflected the new hybrid nature of Japan, one that embraced both tradition and progress. The introduction of soap during the Meiji era was part of a broader shift in Japan's cultural landscape. While soap became a symbol of modernization for the aristocracy, it was also an essential step toward better public health and personal care. As Japan continued to develop throughout the 20th century, its citizens would begin to incorporate modern hygiene practices into their daily routines, and soap would no longer be seen as a luxury, but a necessity. However, the legacy of Emperor Meiji's reforms would always be remembered, not just for his embrace of Western products like soap, but for his vision of a modern, powerful Japan that was poised to join the ranks of the world's great nations. In the bustling streets of ancient Rome, amidst the grand structures and vibrant marketplace chatter, there was something much less glamorous happening that most modern eyes would find both repulsive and bewildering. It wasn't the market's fragrant spices or the beautiful marble columns that captured the attention of the Romans in their daily routines, but rather something much more ordinary, yet surprisingly important. That something was urine, a substance that in Roman times was considered a valuable commodity. In the grand scheme of Roman hygiene practices, which were largely driven by necessity and innovation, urine was not only an overlooked part of human biology, but a central resource. The ancient Romans, always practical in their approach to life, discovered ways to harness the many uses of urine, turning it into a staple of personal hygiene and even a critical element of their economy. And to ensure that this new, somewhat bizarre trade thrived, the Roman government imposed a tax on it, an unusual yet effective move in their ever-growing empire. It all began with the fundamental understanding that urine, though unpleasant to the modern nose, held certain qualities that could be put to good use. Romans quickly recognized that urine contained ammonia, a natural compound that has been used in various forms throughout history as a cleaning agent. The ancient world had no access to the luxury of modern soaps and detergents. Instead, the Romans turned to what was readily available: urine. It was everywhere, easy to collect, and surprisingly highly effective. Romans used urine in several ways, all practical, all linked to cleanliness and preservation. For instance, they utilized urine for laundry. The ammonia in the urine made it an ideal substance for washing clothes, especially to bleach and remove stains. Roman laundries, known as fullonica, used urine to wash their customers' clothes. In fact, the fullers or workers in these laundries were often seen with baskets full of urine-soaked garments, hanging them up to dry after the cleaning process. When the Romans wanted to clean their woolen garments, they would use the liquid to soak and scrub, knowing that the ammonia would break down dirt grease and other stubborn stains. But the use of urine did not stop with clothing. One of the more surprising uses of urine in ancient Rome was for personal hygiene. While we may be horrified at the thought today, Romans found that urine had certain qualities that helped maintain the health of their skin and teeth. The practice of using urine as a mouthwash was widespread, particularly among those with concerns about the appearance of their teeth. It was believed that the ammonia in the urine could whiten teeth by removing stains and other discolorations. The practice of rinsing the mouth with urine was seen as a common remedy for toothaches and other dental issues, especially when more sophisticated forms of dental care were not yet available. Have you heard? A Roman merchant might whisper to his neighbor, his teeth gleaming in the soft afternoon sunlight. My wife swears by it, says her smile has never looked brighter since she started using the urine mouthwash. They say it works wonders for cleaning the teeth. It may sound strange to us now, but to the ancient Romans, it was just another practical solution to a common problem. Even some of the wealthier classes were known to use this method, preferring the results to the alternatives available at the time. As odd as it may sound, urine was also used in the process of tanning leather. Leather workers, known as curriers, would use urine to soften animal hides. By soaking the hides in urine, they could break down the tough exterior, making it more pliable for use in making shoes, garments, and armor. The process of tanning leather in urine was long and arduous, requiring constant attention to ensure that the hides did not spoil. Despite the labor-intensive nature of this work, it was an essential part of Roman life, as leather was used extensively in the production of clothing, footwear, and various goods. What's even more astonishing is that the use of urine in ancient Rome was not left to the plebeians or the working class. The Roman elite, including the emperors themselves, recognized the utility of urine in a variety of contexts. This is where the story takes a strange but fascinating turn into the world of taxes. It might seem incomprehensible to us now, but the Roman Empire had a urine tax. Yes, the government of Rome taxed the collection and sale of urine. This tax, known as the Centesimarum Venalium, was first introduced by the Emperor Vespasian in the 1st century AD. The idea behind the tax was simple. Since urine was so widely used and was an important part of the economy, it only made sense to monetize it. The urine was collected from public urinals and sold to Fulolanique tanners and other industries that relied on it. As one might expect, the imposition of a tax on urine was met with some degree of resistance. However, the Roman Empire, ever the master of efficient governance, understood the value of even the most unlikely resources. In a famous anecdote, Emperor Vespasian is said to have remarked, "Pecunia non olet," money does not stink. The phrase has lived on through the ages not only as a reminder of the empire's shrewdness, but also as a reflection of its pragmatic approach to revenue generation. "What's this I hear about a urine tax?" one Roman citizen might grumble to his neighbor while standing in line at a public urinal. First they tax our lands, then our goods, and now our pee. What's next? A tax on our breath. Despite the complaints, the urine tax worked at least for a time. It became a regular part of Roman fiscal policy, bringing in revenue that was used to support the empire's massive infrastructure, including the construction of roads, aqueducts, and public buildings. The tax on urine was just one example of the Roman Empire's ability to turn even the most mundane and unpleasant resources into valuable commodities. But what might seem odd to us today was in many ways a reflection of the Roman mindset: practical, resourceful, and always looking for new ways to use whatever they had at their disposal. For the Romans, hygiene wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about utility and maintaining the well-being of their society. Whether it was for laundry leather tanning or dental hygiene, urine served a multitude of purposes, many of which would be deemed shocking by modern standards. This practice of using urine as a commodity for both personal care and industry is one of the more unusual aspects of Roman hygiene. Yet, it was not without its merits. The Romans understood the practical applications of urine and recognized its potential long before modern science would reveal its chemical properties. They were in many ways ahead of their time in terms of understanding how everyday resources could be harnessed to improve quality of life. As the story of ancient Rome unfolds, it's easy to get lost in the grandeur of its architecture, the triumphs of its armies, and the machinations of its emperors. However, in the world of hygiene, Rome's reliance on simple but effective solutions, such as the use of urine, offers a fascinating glimpse into how a civilization made do with the resources it had, no matter how strange or unpleasant they might seem. It's a reminder that sometimes necessity truly is the mother of invention, even when it involves something as unappealing as urine. In the grand halls of Versailles, amidst its glittering chandeliers and opulent tapestries, a peculiar fragrance filled the air, a scent that was not from the flowers in the gardens, nor the freshly baked bread from the kitchens. No, it was the unmistakable aroma of perfumes, oils, and scents chosen meticulously by none other than the king himself, Louis XIV. This was a man who, despite ruling over one of the most powerful empires in Europe, was completely disinterested in one particular aspect of life, personal hygiene, at least in the way we might understand it today. Louis XIV, the Sun King, was obsessed with appearances, yes, but also with smells, specifically with masking what was considered unclean, even though by modern standards, his practices would be unimaginable. His obsession with perfume was both an outward display of his status and an essential part of his daily routine. While many might associate cleanliness with water and soap, Louis and his court considered cleanliness a matter of scent. Perfume, rather than bathing, was their way of dealing with the complexities of hygiene, or in this case, a lack thereof. "I do not need to bathe, but I need to smell divine," Louis might have said, adjusting the delicate fabric of his royal shirt, doused in luxurious scent. A royal courtier, ever attentive, might whisper to his fellow in the lavish salons, "The king insists on perfumes, not water. He believes it purifies his skin without a drop of water ever touching it." The idea that perfume could cleanse the body without the need for water bathes sounds ludicrous now, yet in the days of Louis XIV, this belief was not only widespread, but also expected. Bathing, it was thought, might expose the body to unseemly impurities, weakening one's very essence. For the king, whose court was the center of European power and culture, the need for a constant aura of cleanliness and refinement was paramount. It was not just his status that dictated such a habit, but also his desire to maintain an image of purity and perfection that no amount of water could accomplish. At Versailles, Louis XIV had a grand view of his image as the ultimate ruler the symbol of divine authority, the Sun King who dispelled all darkness and impurity with his very presence. But in reality, cleanliness for the royal family and their entourage was not a matter of scrubbing away dirt or washing with soap. Instead, it revolved around layers of white linen shifts worn beneath their clothing to absorb sweat and heavy use of scents to mask the body's natural odor. Imagine the scene in the summer heat of Versailles. As the court members danced and laughed, their clothes, most notably, their underwear, were stained with sweat and the grime of the day. But for the royals, this wasn't a problem. Their linen shifts would catch the sweat, while their fragrances and powders worked tirelessly to maintain their regal aura. Their garments were not meant to be washed regularly, as it was believed that these clothes served a higher purpose to protect the body from the impurities of daily life. And even if these undergarments did get stained or dirty, the smell would be masked by the scent of the finest perfumes from the royal court's perfumers. The stench of body odor was simply not acceptable in a court as grand as Louis's. However, the reality behind these practices was far more questionable. The royal court, along with its lavish palace, had an inadequate sanitation system. Versailles was originally a hunting lodge, but as it transformed into the epicenter of Louis's reign, the plumbing and drainage system struggled to keep up with the needs of such a vast residence. To the outside world, the court's beauty and elegance were unparalleled, but behind the gilded doors, the smell of an overcrowded palace with little access to water lingered. The French aristocrats relied heavily on their linen undergarments to absorb their body's natural waste, and instead of bathing, they wore several layers of these garments to mask the smell. The linen was like armor, a court servant might say to a newcomer. It absorbs, cleanses, and hides what shouldn't be seen. When it's time to replace them, we simply do so, and the king's wardrobe is replenished with fresh scents. And yet this habit wasn't restricted only to Louis XIV. His courtiers, ever eager to follow the king's example, donned their finest garments, layering the white linen beneath their silk tunics, embroidered jackets, and extravagant lace. The linen, much like the king's own, acted as a buffer between the body and the world, trapping dirt and sweat in the soft fabric, while their scent was masked by luxurious oils and perfumes. Louis XIV's love for perfume extended beyond his clothing. It was also a part of his personal care. His shirts, carefully perfumed with aromatic blends like lavender, jasmine, and rose, helped ensure that no sign of unpleasant odor could permeate his regal presence. Do you think the king will allow us to prepare his personal scent for the morning? One servant might ask another, rushing to get ready before the king's arrival. The preparation for the day wasn't just about dressing in opulent silks. It involved the meticulous and almost ritualistic process of ensuring Louis XIV's aroma remained ever-pleasing to those around him. It was even rumored that the king had an entire team of perfumers dedicated to blending his personal scent, adjusting it daily, ensuring it was always fresh and potent. After all, the king's very image depended on being seen as flawless, and that meant eliminating any trace of sweat or body odor. In the absence of frequent baths, Louis XIV's method of hygiene perfumery seemed to be an effort to maintain an air of dignity and cleanliness. While the common folk suffered the indignity of unsanitary living conditions, the royalty in their extravagant palaces remained untouched by such concerns, enveloped in fragrant clouds that shielded them from the same realities others faced. Despite the luxurious appearance of this lifestyle, however, it's clear that the lavish obsession with perfumes and scents didn't solve the underlying issue of cleanliness. It was a superficial attempt to mask deeper issues with hygiene and sanitation ones that would eventually be addressed by advancements in medical science and public health reforms in later centuries. Yet even in the grandeur of Versailles, where water was a scarce and expensive commodity, Louis XIV's perfume-induced cleanliness was all that was needed for the king to feel safe from the unseemly impurities of daily life. His devotion to the art of perfumery and the royal family's dedication to avoiding water baths set the tone for an era where luxury and power often trumped practicality and sanitation. Louis XIV's reign was marked by opulence, artifice, and elegance. But behind the ornate curtains of Versailles, where the Sun King resided in all his splendor, the methods of maintaining cleanliness reflected an era deeply unaware of the true importance of hygiene. Instead, for the king and his court, the practice of masking natural odors with luxurious fragrances became an inseparable part of their image, turning a lack of personal hygiene into an art form that was as much about power as it was about appearance. For us today, it may seem unimaginable to think that perfume could replace a bath. But in the court of Louis XIV, it was the height of royal propriety, a strange, fragrant habit that would later give way to more modern scientific approaches to cleanliness. It is in these practices that we see the distance between royal ideals and the everyday struggles of common people who lived in a world far less fragrant with hygiene habits far more basic. In this strange chapter of history, where smell and image were just as important as substance, we catch a glimpse of how royalty once lived, carefully crafting their public persona, one scented bath at a time. In the heat of the Egyptian desert, beneath the golden sun that beat down upon the vast Nile Valley, the pharaohs stood as paragons of divine power and divine cleanliness. Their royal presence was carefully cultivated not only in the grandeur of their palaces and the magnificence of their statues, but in the meticulous attention to their personal hygiene, which was as deeply ingrained in their culture as the monuments they built to last forever. The Egyptians understood the importance of cleanliness not just as a matter of health, but as a sacred practice, an offering to the gods, and a way to maintain the purity required for those who ruled under divine favor. The royal court of Egypt, particularly during the New Kingdom, was not only a place of political power, but also of luxury and reverence. The pharaohs, often seen as gods themselves, were expected to maintain the highest standards of cleanliness. This was not merely a matter of avoiding dirt. It was a ritual, a form of purification that was intrinsic to the very concept of being a ruler. Cleanliness was symbolic of order, harmony, and favor in the eyes of the gods. When a pharaoh entered his great hall or ascended to the throne, his body had been cleansed, oiled, and perfumed, an outward display of the internal purity expected of a ruler who was to guide his people through a world that was at times as chaotic as it was harsh. It was well known that the Egyptians prized cleanliness, and this habit began with the pharaohs themselves. Each day, the royals would immerse themselves in the Nile River. "It is the water of life," they would say, for not only was it the source of sustenance, it was also a place where purification rituals took place. But these were no ordinary dips in the river. They were grand rituals performed with great reverence. The pharaohs would bathe in the Nile to cleanse their bodies of the dirt that accumulated from the affairs of the day. But they also used oils and ointments to protect their skin from the scorching sun. "You are what you feel," a priest might say, to a young pharaoh, instructing him in the spiritual significance of cleanliness. The ritual bathing in the Nile was followed by anointed oils lotions made from rich plant-based oils combined with perfumes. These fragrant concoctions, often scented with lotus or frankincense, were used not only to smell pleasant, but also to protect the skin from the harsh desert winds. Feel the oil, feel the power, one of the royal servants might whisper as they massaged the oils into the pharaoh's skin. These oils, which became an essential part of Egyptian royal grooming, were so highly valued that they were often presented as gifts to foreign dignitaries. In the royal palace, the cleanliness rituals of the pharaohs were conducted under the watchful eyes of attendants and priests who served as the stewards of purity. These rituals often involved the use of aromatic herbs like myrrh, frankincense, and cedarwood, sacred substances that carried both spiritual and practical benefits. This will shield you from the evil of the world, an old servant might say, as they carefully brushed the pharaoh's hair and smoothed oils into his skin, preparing him for the day. To the Egyptians, it was understood that cleanliness was not merely external, it was internal too. A clean body, they believed, signified a pure spirit, and by purifying oneself, one could remain in the good graces of the gods. But the pharaohs weren't the only ones concerned with hygiene. The people of Egypt, from the nobility down to the common folk, also held cleanliness in high regard, but their practices were far more practical. While the royalty bathed daily in the Nile, most Egyptians used simple basins of water or visited public baths to clean themselves. Still, it was the pharaohs who had access to the finest oils, perfumes, and lotions, luxuries that not only marked their status, but also symbolized their divine right to rule. The use of perfumes in ancient Egypt wasn't limited to just bathing. In fact, it was a central aspect of Egyptian culture, permeating their religious practices, daily rituals, and social customs. Perfumed oils were used to anoint statues of gods, to cleanse the body, and even to create fragrant offerings at temples. The gods must smell the best, an Egyptian priest might declare. This belief in the sanctity of fragrance extended to the idea that a clean, well-scented person was a more virtuous one, and that the gods themselves looked favorably upon those who upheld the standards of purity. In addition to bathing and anointing with oils, the Egyptians were pioneers in dental care, another facet of hygiene that showed their remarkable attention to cleanliness. The pharaohs in particular had access to skilled dentists who would tend to their teeth and gums. Unlike the rest of the world at the time, the Egyptians were aware of the importance of dental hygiene. It was common to see Egyptians using twigs, most often from the Salvadora persica tree, as makeshift toothbrushes. These twigs, known as miswak, were used to scrub teeth and gums clean, preventing decay and promoting healthy teeth. The royal dentists were skilled in the art of dental care, and records suggest they even made use of early forms of dental tools like drills and forceps. But perhaps most fascinating was the Egyptians' ability to preserve the teeth of their royal dead. When pharaohs passed away, their bodies were carefully mummified, and their teeth, often the only part of their bodies to withstand the ravages of time, remained intact for thousands of years. The tombs of these pharaohs sometimes held evidence of the incredible dental care they received in life, teeth that were kept in perfect condition through the use of natural remedies and early dental techniques. The reverence for cleanliness and hygiene in ancient Egypt, especially among the royals, extended beyond personal care it was a spiritual practice. Cleansing one's body, anointing it with oils, and offering fragrant perfumes were seen as acts of purity that ensured a smooth passage to the afterlife. The idea of cleanliness was deeply intertwined with spiritual purity, and for the pharaohs, it was an essential part of their divine role. The act of washing away the impurities of the physical world was seen as a way to prepare the soul for its journey to the afterlife, where it would stand before the gods. In this light, the pharaoh's obsession with hygiene wasn't just about looking or smelling good. It was about ensuring their purity, health, and spiritual favor in the eyes of the gods. Their practices laid the foundation for the modern understanding of personal hygiene as a way of maintaining both physical and spiritual well-being, showing us that even in ancient times, the act of cleanliness held deeper symbolic meaning. Through these practices, the ancient Egyptians set a standard for royal hygiene that has influenced cultures and practices to this very day. Their use of oils, perfumes, and dental care was far ahead of its time, a testament to their understanding of the importance of maintaining health and cleanliness, not just for the body, but for the soul. The royal pharaoh's obsession with hygiene and their intricate rituals reflect a civilization deeply attuned to both the physical and spiritual aspects of life, and their legacy continues to inspire our modern approach to personal care. In the grand halls of their temples, the pharaohs may have left us with stories of gold and grandeur, but their commitment to cleanliness, both physical and spiritual, reminds us that hygiene was not just a royal concern, but a way of life that touched all aspects of ancient Egyptian culture. From the grand baths in the Nile to the meticulous care of their teeth, the pharaohs of Egypt proved that cleanliness is indeed a virtue, a lesson passed down through the ages. Cyrus the Great, a name that echoes through the annals of history, was a ruler whose vision and wisdom extended far beyond the battlefield. As the founder of the Persian Empire, he united much of the ancient world under his reign, stretching his empire from the Indian subcontinent in the east to the shores of the Aegean Sea in the west. Yet despite his military prowess and the vast territories he conquered, one of Cyrus's most innovative and lasting legacies lay in his understanding of water, and not just as a resource for survival, but as an essential element of health, hygiene, and the prosperity of his empire. The importance of clean water was not something that could be taken for granted in Cyrus's time. The ancient world, even with its grand cities and empires, faced numerous challenges in ensuring access to clean drinking water. Many civilizations relied on local rivers and wells, which were often contaminated with waste and disease. But Cyrus the Great, with his far-reaching vision, recognized that the well-being of his people, and his army in particular, depended on more than just military strength. Access to clean water, a seemingly mundane resource, was a key to maintaining the health of his soldiers and sustaining his empire. In the heat of battle, where the struggle for territory and dominance often eclipsed every other concern, it might have been easy for a ruler to overlook such a basic need. But Cyrus, ever the strategist, understood that his army's success depended not only on the sharpness of their weapons or the brilliance of their tactics, but also on the health and endurance of his soldiers. His troops, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, marched through arid deserts, crossed rugged mountains, and ventured into lands that were inhospitable at best. Yet despite the harsh conditions, Cyrus's army maintained its strength. And one of the key reasons for this success was his meticulous attention to water. In the vast expanses of Persia, water sources were often scarce and unevenly distributed, and when Cyrus's army was on the move, he could not afford to rely solely on natural sources. He understood that clean water was vital to prevent disease, keep his soldiers hydrated, and ensure their physical and mental strength remained intact. To that end, Cyrus ensured that his soldiers had access to the freshest, cleanest water possible, no matter where they marched. Water is life, and if our men are to endure, we must keep them nourished with the purest of waters. Cyrus often said to his generals, his voice low but firm, as he addressed the crucial need for hydration and health. It was not just about finding any water. It was about finding the right kind of water, untouched by the filth of disease and contamination. One of the most remarkable ways Cyrus achieved this was by having his soldiers carry water in large wagons, which were filled from specific pristine sources. These sources were often far away from the army's immediate location, but Cyrus insisted that only the cleanest, uncontaminated water would be used. His soldiers, some of the bravest and most disciplined in history, took special care in transporting these vital supplies. The wagons were carefully guarded, and the water was not only rationed, but also protected, often covered by cloths to shield it from the sun and dust of the desert. The water in these wagons was sacred, for it held the very lifeblood of the army. The importance of water to Cyrus's troops was reflected in the strict orders given to his soldiers to maintain cleanliness. Hygiene was critical for their survival, especially when traveling through lands where diseases like dysentery and cholera were common. The Persian king understood that a healthy army was a victorious army, and his practices showed an advanced understanding of public health long before such concepts were formalized. Soldiers were instructed to wash their hands and faces regularly, and while baths may have been a luxury, during long marches they made use of whatever fresh water they could find to clean themselves and their equipment. This commitment to hygiene was unusual in the ancient world, where it was often viewed as secondary to military discipline. Cyrus's commitment to maintaining the health of his soldiers extended beyond just water. His awareness of the dangers of contaminated water supplies and his insistence on proper hygiene set a new standard for the way empires would function in the future. His use of wagons to carry water and his investment in constructing canals and aqueducts to ensure clean water sources were integral to the health of his empire. These waterworks were not only practical, but also symbolic of his broader vision, a vision in which the prosperity and success of his people were paramount. In fact, Cyrus's innovations in water management were a direct precursor to some of the most advanced water infrastructure in the world. His empire was known for its use of qanats, underground irrigation tunnels that transported water from distant sources to cities and farms. These qanats ensured a steady and reliable supply of water to the heart of Persia, even in the harshest of climates. The qanat system, which is still in use in some parts of the Middle East, is a testament to Cyrus's foresight and understanding of the critical role water played in the development of civilization. Build the water systems, and you will build the strength of your empire, Cyrus would tell his engineers and planners. His emphasis on clean water and hygiene helped his empire thrive, even in regions where other civilizations struggled to maintain health in the face of disease. While Cyrus's commitment to water and hygiene was critical to his empire's longevity, it was not merely a pragmatic concern. It was also deeply philosophical. The king's respect for water was in many ways symbolic of his respect for life itself. Water, the very essence of life, was treated with reverence and care, ensuring the health and well-being of the people and soldiers under his command. In this way, Cyrus not only built an empire of vast military strength, but also one that was grounded in a deep understanding of the natural resources that sustained it. As the years passed, Cyrus's emphasis on clean water and hygiene became an integral part of Persian culture. It was a lesson that would be passed down through generations, inspiring future rulers to adopt similar practices. His innovations in water infrastructure became the foundation for future developments in public health, not just in Persia, but throughout the ancient world. Today, we look back on Cyrus the Great, not only as a brilliant military leader and visionary ruler, but also as a pioneer in public health. His legacy endures in the infrastructure he built, the hygiene practices he championed, and the respect for clean water that became embedded in Persian society. The very health and prosperity of his empire rested on the simple yet profound idea that access to clean water was not just a luxury, but a necessity for survival. In a world where many rulers of the time were focused on conquest and the expansion of their empires, Cyrus understood that to conquer the land, one first had to conquer the elements that sustain life. His commitment to clean water laid the groundwork for public health practices that would shape future civilizations, ensuring that the empire he built would endure for generations. It was through his vision, leadership, and understanding of water that he achieved greatness, and that his empire thrived in a way that many others never could. The Ottoman Empire, a vast and culturally rich civilization that spanned 3 continents, was not only known for its military prowess and architectural wonders, but also for its sophisticated and highly refined standards of cleanliness. In an empire that stretched from the heart of modern-day Turkey to the furthest reaches of North Africa and the Balkans, the importance of hygiene was not just a matter of physical health, but a reflection of cultural pride and royal grandeur. One of the most striking features of Ottoman hygiene culture was the prominence of public bathhouses known as hammams. These baths were more than just places to wash. They were the center of daily life, deeply woven into the social fabric of the empire. For the Ottoman royalty, and especially for the sultans, maintaining cleanliness was a sign of power, purity, and divine favor. These bathhouses were vast, luxurious spaces that embodied the empire's obsession with comfort and cleanliness. The hammam served a practical function, offering a space for individuals to cleanse themselves, but it was also a place of relaxation, socialization, and spiritual purification. The practice of bathing had its roots in the Roman tradition, but under the Ottomans, it evolved into an institution influencing daily routines and rituals. To the Ottomans, the hammam was sacred, a place not only for personal cleanliness, but also for renewing one's body and soul. Every day, members of the royal court, including the sultans themselves, would visit the hammam as part of their daily routine. The sultans, who enjoyed the finest luxuries and were often attended by a retinue of servants, did not bathe out of necessity alone, but as a matter of prestige. A ruler who is clean is one who commands respect. A vizier once remarked as he watched Sultan Mehmed IV enter the grand bathhouse at Topkapi Palace, the center of the empire's court. For the Sultan, bathing was more than just a physical act. It was a ceremonial affair, punctuated with rituals that demonstrated his opulence. The bathhouse he frequented was a monumental structure, a reflection of Ottoman architectural ingenuity. Built with marble floors and intricately carved columns, providing a private sanctuary from the affairs of state. Steam poured from the heated stone floors as attendants skilled in the art of massage and cleansing rubbed oils into his skin, their hands steady and practiced. "Today, we use rose oil, Your Majesty," one of the attendants would say as he applied a fragrant balm to the Sultan's skin. "It is said to refresh the soul." The Sultan nodded approvingly, savoring the scent as the aromatic oils enveloped him in a haze of luxury. Rosewater, along with other exotic oils, such as jasmine and amber, were a staple in the Ottoman royals' bathing experience. The baths were often accompanied by perfumed towels and intricate scrubbing routines that ensured not only cleanliness, but also the indulgence of the senses. The baths in the Ottoman Empire were far from modest. These were spaces of social exchange where men and women could gather to relax, converse, and take care of their personal grooming. The royal hammam was exclusively reserved for the upper echelons of society, including the Sultan and his harem, and was meticulously maintained to ensure the highest standards of cleanliness. For those outside the court, public bathhouses were a place to cleanse both body and spirit, a significant part of daily life in the empire. What set the Ottoman hammams apart from others in the world at the time was the sheer scale and luxury of the facilities. In cities like Istanbul, the capital of the empire, the number of bathhouses seemed almost endless. Each bathhouse was more than just a place to wash. It was an architectural marvel, designed with intricate tile work, heated floors, and domed ceilings that let in the light from above. The high ceilings echoed with the sound of water splashing against marble as attendants scrubbed the bodies of clients with coarse mitts, followed by soothing massages. The sultans themselves, often surrounded by a retinue of concubines and attendants, were accustomed to multiple baths a day. A royal could be seen emerging from the hammam early in the morning, the steam still clinging to their skin as their robes shimmered in the sunlight. Their hair would be carefully styled, their faces anointed with oils that made them appear almost ethereal. The royal baths were a symbol of the sultan's ability to maintain control, to govern not just the land, but also the cleanliness of his person. One cannot help but marvel at how these lavish bathhouses provided more than just physical cleanliness, but were seen as a purification ritual. Ottoman sultans viewed cleanliness as integral to their leadership, almost divine in its importance. A ruler who bathes in such luxury, who cares for his body, is also a ruler who knows the value of life, and his subjects said an advisor once speaking to the importance of bathing as part of the sultan's public image. The connection between hygiene, health, and the divine was never far from the minds of the Ottoman elite. Yet while the royalty indulged in the most luxurious bathing practices, the common people often found themselves at the mercy of much more modest conditions. The disparity between the royal hammams and the public bathhouses is striking. While the sultan could afford the finest scented oils and attendants, the regular citizen made do with what they could, often using water from public sources or communal bathhouses that were not as elaborate or carefully maintained. There were, however, similarities in the underlying cultural practices of bathing. For many, bathing was a communal activity, a means of socializing, and it played a central role in maintaining personal hygiene regardless of one's social standing. However, the contrast between the opulence of the royal baths and the more basic bathing options available to the commoners highlighted the vast differences in how cleanliness was perceived. For the sultans and those in the upper classes, cleanliness was an outward expression of their divine right to rule, a reflection of their elevated status. Meanwhile, the common people, while still engaging in bathing practices, often had to rely on simpler, less glamorous methods. In the midst of all this, the Ottoman Sultan's obsession with cleanliness extended to their courts. The palace guards, the concubines, and all those who served the Sultan's household were expected to maintain the same high standard of cleanliness. If one of the concubines was found lacking in cleanliness, it was a serious matter affecting their status in the harem. The palace itself, located within the walls of the Topkapi Palace, was no different. The floors, rooms, and even the gardens were meticulously maintained to reflect the Sultan's grandeur. It was said that Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent had a special team of servants whose job was to care for his personal space, ensuring it was always pristine. Everything had its place, and the royal space was a reflection of the Sultan's power. The emphasis on cleanliness was part of the broader aesthetic and political strategy of the Ottoman court. Imperial grandeur was best expressed not just in wealth and military might, but in the cleanliness and luxury of one's personal life. The Ottoman Empire's attention to cleanliness and the hammam is not just an example of indulgence. It was an expression of power, identity, and cultural pride. The sultans, ever aware of their status as leaders, not only of a military empire, but of a sophisticated society, understood that personal care and hygiene were deeply tied to their ability to rule. This practice of cleanliness would go on to influence many cultures, leaving a lasting legacy in the way royal courts would approach the concept of personal hygiene. From the use of scented oils to the establishment of luxurious public bathhouses, the Ottoman Empire's commitment to cleanliness set a standard that would not be replicated until centuries later. The Sultan's bath was not just a private indulgence, it was a statement. The Roman Empire, with its vast territory and sprawling civilization, held not only power, but an intrinsic sense of refinement and luxury, particularly within the royal courts. Roman emperors and kings, revered as divine figures, commanded vast riches and elaborate lifestyles, often seen as symbols of wealth and grandeur. Yet amidst this opulence, one aspect of their lives remained surprisingly paradoxical: hygiene. While public bathhouses flourished throughout the empire, serving as communal spaces for bathing, socializing, and relaxation, the elite, including Roman emperors, rarely subjected themselves to the same customs. Instead, the royals of Rome had an entirely different approach to cleanliness, one that revolved not around water, but rather the lavish use of oils, perfumes, and exclusive private treatments. Their obsession with personal care and the lengths they would go to in order to maintain appearances were not just a mark of luxury. They were intertwined with their social status, creating a strange disconnect between public hygiene practices and private indulgence. It was often said that Roman emperors, in their pursuit of both cleanliness and control over their image, avoided the more communal aspect of bathing altogether. While the masses crowded into public bathhouses, those monumental Roman structures that bathed entire neighborhoods in the luxury of steam-hot water and social ritual, the emperors would rarely be seen in these bustling public spaces. Instead, they preferred more private, individualized treatments, ones that allowed them to maintain a sense of exclusivity and control. In a society that revered cleanliness as much as it did luxury, this preference for personal care rituals was seen as an essential part of a king's image. Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, was particularly notorious for his aversion to communal baths. His discomfort with public bathing was not born of modesty or a fear of the water itself, but rather the masses that surrounded him. To Augustus, the very notion of being surrounded by the common people in a space where hygiene and intimacy collided was a concept he could not fathom. His approach to cleanliness, like his reign, was one of controlled refinement. Instead of public bathing, Augustus and many other emperors were known to indulge in lavish oil treatments. Bathing, they believed, could be too much of a public affair, a routine for the people, not the gods. Roman kings instead took to their private chambers, where their attendants would administer oils that were often scented with the finest perfumes available. These oils were used to cleanse the body, protect the skin, and offer a refreshing scent, one that would linger and serve as a mark of nobility. Some of these oils were infused with exotic ingredients, rare herbs and spices that traveled from distant corners of the empire, ensuring that the royal body remained not just clean, but intoxicatingly fragrant. One particularly favored oil was made from olive oil, infused with fragrances like rose myrrh and lavender, which had long been prized for their healing and cosmetic properties. Roman emperors would often use this oil to rub their bodies down after a long day of politics and power struggles, ensuring that they presented themselves not only as rulers of Rome, but as living gods untouched by the filth of the common world. Julius Caesar, too, is said to have been meticulous about his appearance and hygiene. He was known for his strong, powerful image, and he maintained his stature by focusing on his personal care in ways that the common man simply couldn't afford. He too avoided public baths, preferring instead the privacy of his own quarters. Caesar, whose physical appearance was often noted for its care, would frequently use scented oils accompanied by massages to maintain his skin's luster and his ever-immaculate grooming. His personal appearance was one of his greatest tools, a form of power that extended beyond his military conquests to his charisma and the way the people of Rome perceived him. Maintaining a regal, clean appearance was as much a political tactic as it was a personal ritual. But this obsession with oils and perfumes was not limited to only a few emperors. It permeated the court life of Rome, from the highest-ranking officials to the royal family. Private baths, along with oil massages, became a daily part of the aristocracy's routine. The entire court culture was imbued with this idea of pristine appearance and cleanliness that went far beyond what the common people could afford or experience. It was often said that the emperors of Rome sought to be untouchable, not just by power, but by the very things that could dirty their appearance, like sweat dirt and grime. To them, to be clean was to be closer to divinity. To be seen as anything less than perfect was an insult to their godlike status. And it wasn't just their body that required such attention. Those around them, too, were held to these same meticulous standards. Emperors often had whole teams of attendants, from personal bathers to specialists in the art of scented oils and perfumes. They would attend to every part of the emperor's body, ensuring that not only his skin, but his hair, nails, and clothing were maintained to the highest possible standards. But while Roman kings indulged in these luxuries, the public was left to their own devices. Bathhouses open to all classes were often overcrowded and less hygienic than one might assume. The shared nature of these spaces, though essential for the masses, was quite different from the private rituals of the emperors. Public bathhouses often became breeding grounds for diseases like lice scabies and even typhus. This contrast between royal care and the general public's often unsanitary conditions showed the vast chasm between the ruling class and the people they governed. Historians also note that many emperors used elaborate perfumes to mask body odors, which would be common in an era without modern deodorants. It was customary in the royal courts to wear fragrant robes and to apply perfume daily to maintain an air of sophistication and opulence. Even their linens were soaked in perfume, ensuring that their presence in a room was marked by the scent before they entered it. The wealth of the empire was tied not just to its military and political power, but also to the lavish, almost excessive cleanliness of its ruling class. This perfumed existence was as much about maintaining power as it was about comfort or hygiene. Despite the luxurious oils and fragrant perfumes that defined the cleanliness of Roman royalty, there was a darker side to their obsession with personal care. The emphasis on outward cleanliness often meant that these emperors, with their private bathing rituals and scented oils, were disconnected from the reality of hygiene for the rest of the Roman population. The common people had neither the time nor the resources for such indulgences. They had to rely on the public bathhouses and the basic hygiene practices that, while beneficial in some ways, could never compare to the opulence of royal care. At the same time, the Roman elite's obsession with cleanliness underscored their belief in the divine right to rule. If a ruler was not clean, if they could not present themselves as an immaculate example of power, then their legitimacy could be questioned. Thus, personal hygiene became an extension of power and authority, a reflection of the emperor's divine role and the grandeur of Rome itself. In the end, the hygiene practices of Roman kings, though luxurious and far removed from the experiences of the average Roman, reflect the deeply ingrained belief in cleanliness as not only a sign of personal care, but a symbol of one's divine right to rule. Through elaborate oil treatments, perfumes, and private baths, these emperors sought to maintain an image of purity and power, a practice that would influence future monarchs and royalty across the globe. But behind the veil of scent and oils, the reality of hygiene in ancient Rome was far from perfect, marked by contradictions, excesses, and a gulf between the elite and the common people that would persist for centuries. Cleopatra, the legendary queen of Egypt, was not only known for her intellect, political prowess, and captivating beauty, but also for her opulent and elaborate hygiene practices, which became almost as famous as her reign itself. One of her most renowned beauty rituals was her indulgence in luxurious and somewhat strange baths made from donkey milk. While today, the thought of bathing in milk may seem an extravagant and impractical indulgence, Cleopatra's use of this natural ingredient was rooted in both ancient Egyptian traditions and her relentless pursuit of maintaining her beauty and allure. Cleopatra's bath of donkey milk was said to have been a central part of her beauty regimen. Historians and scholars suggest that she used the milk not only for its purported skin-softening qualities, but also because of its rich content of lactic acid, which helps to exfoliate the skin by sloughing off dead cells and promoting the growth of fresh, smooth skin. The idea was simple. A milk bath would hydrate, nourish, and renew her skin, leaving her with the radiant, youthful appearance that was so often associated with her. Donkey milk, in particular, was chosen because it was believed to have higher levels of vitamin C and minerals compared to other types of milk, making it an ideal choice for maintaining a healthy complexion. But Cleopatra's use of donkey milk was not a mere whim or fleeting beauty trend. It was deeply connected to her status as a ruler and her belief in her divine beauty. As the queen of a civilization steeped in the art of cosmetics and beauty rituals, Cleopatra had access to the most exotic and luxurious ingredients of her time. Her beauty was not only a personal obsession, but a political tool. She knew that her appearance was key to her power. Her beauty could charm the likes of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, securing her position as both a lover and a sovereign. Every detail of her physical appearance was meticulously cultivated to uphold the image of a goddess, and her bathing rituals were an essential part of this. The bath in donkey milk was not simply a means of pampering herself, it was part of her larger strategy to project an image of supreme elegance, grace, and power. Cleopatra's beauty rituals were shrouded in mystery and allure. She reportedly kept a private team of attendants who ensured her beauty and cleanliness were always maintained to the highest standards. Her royal bathhouses were likely furnished with the finest amenities where servants would prepare her bath, mixing the milk with other luxurious ingredients such as honey and essential oils. These preparations were all part of her meticulous grooming routine, ensuring she stayed radiant in both appearance and reputation. But Cleopatra's indulgence in luxury did not stop at her baths. Her cosmetics were legendary, made from some of the rarest and most exotic ingredients available in the ancient world. Cleopatra is said to have been a master of beauty potions, and her perfume collections were the stuff of legend. One of the most famous perfumes attributed to her was a complex blend of myrrh, frankincense, and cinnamon, mixed with other ingredients like rose and jasmine. These perfumes were believed to have powerful aphrodisiac properties, and Cleopatra would use them generously, enveloping herself in these alluring scents as part of her daily routine. In addition to perfumes, Cleopatra's cosmetics also included eye makeup, a staple of ancient Egyptian beauty. She was known to use malachite and kohl to enhance her eyes, which were considered one of her most captivating features. Kohl, a dark powder, was applied around the eyes to create dramatic almond-shaped eyes, a look that has since become synonymous with Egyptian beauty. This makeup served both aesthetic and practical purposes, as it was believed to protect the eyes from the harsh glare of the sun, as well as from infections and irritants. Cleopatra's use of makeup was far more than a simple enhancement of her beauty. It was a carefully crafted display of her power, her connection to the gods, and her ability to control the image she projected to the world. Cleopatra's lavish cosmetic practices extended beyond just face and skin care. Her attention to every detail of her appearance was driven by a deep-seated belief that beauty was not only a personal asset, but a political one. In a time when a woman's image was as much about her social and political power as her physical beauty, Cleopatra used her appearance as a weapon in her political arsenal. Every brush of makeup, every drop of perfume, and every bath in donkey milk was carefully calculated to ensure she presented herself as the epitome of divine femininity, untouchable and irresistible. She was the embodiment of Cleopatra, a woman whose beauty was so powerful that it could influence the course of history. However, Cleopatra's beauty rituals were not simply about vanity or indulgence. In ancient Egypt, beauty was often associated with the divine. The gods and goddesses of Egyptian mythology were often depicted with flawless, radiant skin, perfect hair, and an air of timeless elegance. Cleopatra's beauty was intended to align with this divine archetype. In her efforts to maintain and enhance her beauty, she was aligning herself with the gods, creating an image that went beyond mortal understanding. She wanted to be seen as a living goddess, and in many ways, she succeeded. But Cleopatra's use of donkey milk wasn't without its critics. Even in her time, her beauty rituals were considered extreme, and her bathing in milk was sometimes mocked by others. The Romans, for instance, who valued hygiene practices and cleanliness, might have been astonished by the extravagance of her milk baths. Yet for Cleopatra, these practices were essential. They were a statement of her power and an expression of her divine right to rule. Her beauty was a commodity, one that was essential not only for her personal well-being, but for the political maneuvers that would keep her at the center of power in Egypt. The bath of donkey milk became a symbol of both luxury and ritual, a practice that connected Cleopatra to the ancient traditions of Egypt, while also setting her apart as a ruler who transcended the norms of her time. This indulgence in luxurious baths and cosmetics was not something the common people could afford. Instead, it was a privilege reserved for the highest echelons of society, particularly the queen herself, who wielded beauty and charm as part of her sovereign power. In contrast, the common people of Egypt, while certainly familiar with their own personal care routines, would not have had access to such lavish treatments. Instead, they had to make do with the more basic hygiene practices of their time, rinsing in the Nile, using natural oils and perfumes, and relying on rudimentary skincare methods passed down through generations. For them, beauty rituals were not extravagant indulgences, but necessary practices for survival in the harsh conditions of the ancient world. Cleopatra's use of donkey milk for her baths, however, remains one of the most fascinating aspects of her reign. It symbolizes not just the queen's beauty and indulgence, but also her understanding of the importance of image and perception. Her use of this luxurious treatment was a way of showing the world that she was above the ordinary, that she was a ruler connected to the gods, and that her beauty was something to be revered. It also highlighted the stark contrast between the royal and the common, the indulgence of the elite versus the practical necessities of the everyday person. In the end, Cleopatra's bath of donkey milk was not just a beauty treatment, it was an integral part of her identity as queen, as goddess, and as one of the most famous women in history. Through her beauty rituals, Cleopatra created a lasting image that has endured for millennia, captivating the imagination of those who came after her. The story of her indulgence in donkey milk baths and luxurious cosmetics is a testament to her power, her influence, and her ability to shape her own legacy one bath at a time. King Louis XV of France. The Sun King is often remembered for his grandeur and the opulence of his court. Versailles, his glittering palace, became the epitome of royal luxury, a place where wealth and power radiated from every corner. However, despite its golden exterior, the Palace of Versailles, like many royal residences of the time, had a dark secret that many would have preferred to keep hidden its primitive hygiene systems, and the unsanitary conditions in which Louis XIV and his court lived. Louis XIV's Versailles was a marvel of architecture and design, a place where elegance and extravagance reigned supreme. Yet beneath its polished stone facades and ornate furnishings, the palace was plagued with some rather primitive plumbing systems and inadequate sanitation. The palace, built on a marshy area, was an inherently difficult structure to maintain, particularly when it came to cleanliness. As the court grew in size, so too did the challenges surrounding hygiene. The plumbing system in Versailles was far from the advanced designs we take for granted today. Instead of the intricate systems of pipes that deliver clean water and remove waste, the palace relied on rudimentary methods that often involved human labor. For much of the 17th century, the palace had no centralized sewage system, no toilets, no modern-day plumbing. In fact, many of the royal family and nobility relied on chamber pots, and the waste was disposed of in an equally primitive manner. In the absence of modern toilets, servants would empty these chamber pots from the windows of the palace with no real system for waste disposal in place. It wasn't unusual for passers-by in the gardens or along the palace grounds to have to dodge these unpleasant deposits, creating a rather less than regal atmosphere. Despite the royal splendor that dripped from every chandelier, there was a palpable stench in the air, one that was not easily hidden by the grand perfumes of the court. Versailles, at its peak, was home to thousands of courtiers, servants, and visitors, all sharing the same cramped spaces, and that sheer number of people living in close proximity created a breeding ground for disease. The overcrowding was exacerbated by the fact that the palace had no effective sanitation infrastructure to match its growing population. Bathing was infrequent, and hygiene was often considered a luxury reserved for the elite. For many of the courtiers, a daily bath was an unthinkable indulgence. A bath in the 17th century was not the kind of comfort we associate with modern spa days. In fact, full-body baths were a rarity, and they were seen more as a special treatment than a regular part of daily life. The general consensus at the time was that frequent bathing could open the pores to harmful vapors and led to illness. This belief contributed to the reluctance of many members of the French court, including Louis XIV himself, to take regular baths. Instead, they relied on perfumes and powders to mask the smell of sweat and the remnants of bodily oils, leading to a rather strange and contradictory situation. The king, like others in his court, would go to great lengths to avoid full-body immersion in water, preferring instead to clean his body with the use of perfumes, which were abundant in Versailles. In an attempt to hide the natural odors that came from neglecting regular bathing, the aristocracy of Louis XIV's court used a vast array of scented oils and perfumes. The royal court, ever preoccupied with the image of perfection, spared no expense on fragrances. Louis XIV himself was known for his love of perfumes. He even had perfumers specially commissioned to create unique scents for him. His obsession with these luxurious aromas was partly because they served a dual purpose, masking the unwashed body odors of the royal court, while elevating the king's persona as a figure of immense grace and opulence. However, while the perfumes covered the unpleasant smells, they could do little to improve the overall hygiene of the court. Despite this lavish indulgence in perfumes, the palace itself still suffered from rampant diseases. The lack of proper sanitation meant that illnesses like smallpox, typhus, and other contagious diseases spread easily among the population. Even though Louis XIV's reign was known for its sophistication and cultural advancements, the living conditions within his court were still primitive by today's standards. The overcrowding in the palace, coupled with the inadequate sanitation facilities, meant that disease was never far away. One of the biggest threats came from the lack of proper waste disposal. Waste would often be left in chamber pots, and as previously mentioned, these would be emptied into the palace grounds with little regard for hygiene. This situation made it almost inevitable that disease would spread throughout the population of Versailles. This lack of cleanliness did not remain confined to the palace. The grounds surrounding the palace were equally affected by the sanitation issues. The gardens of Versailles, known for their breathtaking beauty and symmetry, were often marred by the mess that came from the lack of proper waste management. The same splendor that made Versailles the envy of Europe also hit a growing public health crisis. And yet, despite these issues, Louis XIV's obsession with cleanliness in the royal sense continued. The palace was filled with a layer of perfume to mask the filth, while court rituals and etiquette focused on maintaining an outward appearance of dignity and grandeur. In contrast to the unsanitary conditions behind the scenes, the court maintained a veneer of elegance that allowed them to avoid confronting the true nature of their hygiene practices. It was a court in which outward appearances mattered far more than inward health, and the focus was on creating an image of perfection that was largely detached from the reality of daily life. Louis XIV's approach to hygiene ultimately reflected the broader social attitudes of the time. The aristocracy, more concerned with status and appearance than practicality, relied heavily on outward displays of cleanliness, while the common people were left to endure a different set of challenges. Those outside the court, who lacked the resources for perfumes, oils, and elaborate regimens, faced much harsher conditions with little attention paid to sanitation or health. Their lives were filled with the harsh realities of disease and the absence of any formal systems for waste management. The personal cleanliness of the nobility, with its strange reliance on perfumes and neglect of the most basic hygienic practices, highlights the irony of Versailles. Beneath the opulence and grandeur of the court, there was a deeply entrenched lack of attention to personal health. Disease, stench, and overcrowding all remained a constant challenge, even within the halls of power. It is a stark reminder that the outward appearance of wealth and luxury does not always align with the realities of health and hygiene. Despite these issues, Louis XIV's reign left an indelible mark on France and the world, shaping not only the future of French culture and society, but also the way that hygiene and cleanliness would evolve in the centuries to come. Versailles, for all its magnificence, remains a symbol of the complexity of royal life, where grandeur often masked the harsh realities of daily existence. In many ways, Louis XIV's palace represents the contradiction of an age that sought to create perfection, even when the truth was far messier and more difficult to confront. As the story of Versailles unfolds, it becomes clear that the hygiene practices of the royal court were deeply tied to social norm status and the pursuit of an idealized image of beauty and grace. Even in the face of primitive plumbing, overcrowding, and disease, the court of Louis XIV remained a shining beacon of power and elegance, albeit one shrouded in the unspoken truth of its dirty secrets. This story reminds us that sometimes the outward display of beauty and perfection can hide the most uncomfortable truths, and the pursuit of cleanliness can sometimes be more about appearances than actual health. In the opulent courts of European royalty, where elegance was paramount, personal hygiene was not just a matter of health. It was a statement of status, wealth, and sophistication. Among the many symbols of royal grandeur, few were as conspicuous and as fraught with practical challenges as the elaborate wigs worn by the nobility. Wigs, far from being mere fashion accessories, were an essential aspect of hygiene and a vital part of royal life, often masking not just a lack of cleanliness, but also reinforcing the social hierarchies of the time. The practice of wearing wigs among royalty became widespread in the 17th and 18th centuries, most famously in France under the reign of Louis XIV. But the history of wigs as a marker of royal hygiene goes back further. The very idea of covering one's head with an artificial hairpiece was initially driven by necessity. Royalty, particularly in crowded and often unhygienic courts, needed a way to address the pervasive problem of lice, a persistent menace that thrived in the thick, often untreated hair of courtiers. Lice were no strangers to the royal courts of Europe. Despite the lavish surroundings, the proximity in which nobles and servants lived, and the lack of proper hygiene in those days, lice became a part of everyday life. The tight quarters of royal residences, combined with the limited bathing practices, created a perfect breeding ground for these pests. Even the richest and most powerful were not immune to the discomfort and humiliation that came with lice infestations. The royal court of Versailles, with its grand palaces and gardens, was in reality a hotbed of lice. Imagine the scene: the marble floors, the glittering chandeliers, the opulent gowns, and the elaborate court dances. Yet beneath all of this, the nobility struggled with their most intimate concern, lice, which could infest the hair clothing and even the furniture. With full-body baths being a rarity at the time, many turned to wigs as a way to avoid the discomfort of lice-infested hair. Marie Antoinette, Louis XVI's infamous queen, was no stranger to the struggles of lice. It is said that her enormous powdered wigs were not only a fashion statement, but also a practical measure to keep the lice away from her natural hair. Wigs were not simply a fashion accessory for the aristocracy. They served as a necessary shield against lice and the unsanitary conditions that permeated the royal courts. The practice of wearing wigs began in earnest during the reign of King Louis V of France, but it truly flourished under the reign of Louis XIV. Wigs became a way of signaling wealth status and royal approval. A well-maintained wig was not only a sign of cleanliness, but also a sign of nobility. Those who could afford them wore large, elaborate wigs, often powdered to give a whitened appearance and styled in intricate curls and loops. But there was more to these wigs than just fashion. Wigs were a practical necessity. Instead of continually battling the lice that plagued their natural hair, many members of the royal court turned to wigs as a cleaner, more manageable solution. With natural hair frequently unkempt or infested, wigs offered a convenient escape from the unpleasantries of daily hygiene maintenance. Yet these wigs were not simple affairs. They were carefully crafted from human hair, horsehair, or sometimes a blend of both, which were then styled by skilled wig makers. For a royal family accustomed to luxury, these wigs came with a steep price tag. Each wig had to be painstakingly maintained. They would be washed, combed, and repaired frequently. And when the wigs became too full of lice, or the wearer's scalp was too irritated from constant use, a new one would be ordered. To ensure that their wigs remained pristine and lice-free, the royals had to take elaborate measures. The wigs were regularly boiled in hot water to cleanse them of any pests and to restore their shape. While this may seem a rather crude form of hygiene, by modern standards, it was an essential part of life in those times. Boiling the wigs would kill any lice that had taken residence in the hair, and at the same time help to preserve the wig's shape and structure. Along with boiling the wigs were also scented with powerful perfumes to mask any unpleasant odors. These scents, often floral or spicy, were a crucial part of the royal hygiene routine. Since bathing was infrequent, perfumes became the primary method of masking body odor. In fact, the use of strong scents and fragrant oils was so ingrained in courtly life that many royal servants were employed solely to create, apply, and maintain these fragrances. The scented wigs were not just about cleanliness, but also about ensuring that the aristocrats always smelled pleasant and maintained their sense of grandeur. The wigs, which were often heavy and uncomfortable, became more than just a necessity. They were symbols of the wearer's power and prestige. The more elaborate and carefully crafted the wig, the higher the status of the person wearing it. The wig makers themselves became highly revered in royal circles, and their creations were sometimes as expensive as the finest garments. This was more than mere vanity. It was a crucial part of maintaining a public image of cleanliness, opulence, and above all, status. The elaborate care taken to maintain wigs also reflected the importance of these accessories in establishing and reinforcing social hierarchies. In the 18th century, the wearing of wigs became a hallmark of nobility and aristocracy. The wealthier members of society wore wigs that were larger, more elaborate, and more meticulously crafted than those worn by commoners. The style, color, and size of the wig communicated the social standing of its wearer. For instance, the higher the status, the more powder was used on the wig. White powder was particularly popular, symbolizing not just cleanliness, but also wealth, as white powder signified the ability to afford luxury items that the lower classes could not. But beyond their fashion and social symbolism, wigs had a direct relationship with cleanliness and hygiene. For the nobility, these wigs were the primary tool for managing body odors and lice infestations. Unlike the common folk who had access to far fewer resources, the aristocracy had the means to employ the necessary tools to remain hygienic by social standards despite the underlying conditions of the era. Personal hygiene among the royal families of the time was far more than just a matter of cleanliness. It was an integral part of their identity. Being clean was not merely about physical health. It was about maintaining one's social status. Hygiene was viewed as a reflection of a person's moral standing, and by wearing wigs and relying on perfumes and scented oils, the royals of the 18th century were signaling their importance in society. Cleanliness was a luxury that was afforded to them, and they were able to indulge in it in ways that most others could not. However, despite the elaborate care given to wigs, the reality of hygiene in royal courts was far from perfect. The court was rife with disease, and the lack of regular bathing contributed to poor sanitation. While wigs and perfumes masked the outward signs of neglect, the underlying hygiene issues were never fully addressed. Royalty, in their pursuit of cleanliness, often relied more on appearances than on actual health. The use of wigs with their elaborate care routines became a necessary part of this image building. As we think about these royal habits, it's easy to imagine the grand spectacles of the 18th century court. The courtiers in their finest gowns, the king with his powdered wig, each one meticulously maintaining their appearance as a sign of their status. Beneath the grand facades, however, these royal hygiene practices often reflected a deep disconnect from the practicalities of cleanliness. Wigs, perfumes, and oils were used not just for grooming, but as tools to navigate a world where real hygiene was elusive and cleanliness was merely a symbol. Through these strange and fascinating rituals, we catch a glimpse of the values that drove the aristocracy's obsession with cleanliness. Hygiene for them was never just about health, it was about status, about maintaining an image of grace and power in a world that was often much messier than it seemed. The wigs they wore were not just a shield against lice, but also a reflection of the vast divide between the royal elite and the common folk. These wigs, with all their elaborate care, were a symbol of the luxury that only the few could afford, and they remain a reminder of the strange ways in which hygiene, social status, and personal grooming were intertwined in the courts of Europe. The story of the wigs reveals the paradoxes of royal hygiene, where cleanliness was a matter of appearance, not always a reflection of health. The royals, with their perfumes and elaborate wigs, might have looked pristine on the outside, but they lived in a world where the reality of hygiene was far more complicated and sometimes more than a little dirty. In the grand halls and opulent courts of royal palaces, where every corner echoed with the whispers of power, the importance of cleanliness went far beyond personal comfort or health. For royalty, hygiene was an integral part of how they maintained their image and their status. It was a tool of self-representation, a way to assert superiority, and a reflection of the vast divide between the aristocracy and the common people. The royals understood the power of cleanliness not just in terms of health, but as a way to set themselves apart, to demonstrate that they were above the ordinary, beyond the reach of the grime and struggles of everyday life. For the rich and powerful, personal hygiene was far more than a mundane everyday task. It was a spectacle. Whether in the splendid courts of Versailles, the stately halls of London's palaces, or the intricate rooms of Ottoman sultans, the hygiene rituals practiced by royalty played an important role in shaping public perception. Cleanliness was linked to wealth and moral superiority, creating a clear distinction between the royal elite and the masses. Royals didn't just bathe or groom themselves, they performed acts of cleanliness that were meant to impress and to showcase their lofty place in society. For centuries, cleanliness was considered a sign of moral worth and social standing. In the eyes of the common folk, royalty had the luxury of enjoying a life far removed from the filth and disease that plagued the lower classes. Their hygiene practices were not just about staying healthy. They were carefully curated performances that communicated wealth and divine favor. A well-kept royal was a visible reminder of their superiority, a figure elevated both by their lavish lifestyle and their immaculate appearance. While the aristocracy and the commoners both struggled with hygiene, the royals had the means to approach cleanliness on a scale unimaginable for the average person. The wealthier royals, particularly those in Western Europe, could afford personal attendants to bathe them, elaborate grooming rituals, and even imported luxury products. Their bodies were a symbol of their divine right to rule, and as such, their personal hygiene was treated as a spectacle. It was a performance of grace, a subtle way of flaunting their power and their access to resources. One such example was King Louis XIV of France, who built his reputation not just through military victories, and political maneuvering, but through his highly publicized appearance and the rituals surrounding it. His courtiers were constantly aware of the importance of maintaining their image. Louis would have his courtiers attend court in pristine, starched outfits and perfectly styled hair. His personal hygiene was as carefully curated as his public persona. He even had a dedicated group of servants responsible for ensuring that his appearance was flawless, as well as another group specifically tasked with maintaining the cleanliness of his court. It was a delicate, almost theatrical performance, where every gesture, every clothing choice, and every action was meant to reinforce his image as the center of power. As for bathing, the royals, especially in the early modern period, were far more conscious of how public perceptions influenced their status. It was common practice for kings and queens to bathe in private, away from the public eye, because bathing, especially in a communal or public setting, was associated with lower class activities. Public baths were often seen as places of moral decay, and for those in the royal court, a place where the boundaries of class and status could be blurred. Public bathing was seen as a necessary evil for the poor, but for royalty, it was a form of intimacy that they had to avoid. The concept of privacy in bathing also served to maintain an aura of mystery and exclusivity around royalty. While most common folk were forced to use public baths, the nobility could afford private bathhouses and dedicated servants to maintain their hygiene. These private bathhouses, often extravagant in design, were carefully curated for their royal users. The process of bathing was not just an act of cleansing, it was a form of personal indulgence that could be done in peace without the intrusion of the masses. For the royals, the experience of bathing was luxurious, meant to relax their bodies and reaffirm their elevated status. And after a bath, they could wrap themselves in richly scented linens, powders, and oils. This divide between public and private cleanliness also underscored the tension between appearances and reality. The royalty, while meticulous in their hygiene rituals, often lived in an environment that was not as clean as it appeared. The palaces, though meticulously maintained, were often overcrowded with servants and visitors. And despite the grand efforts to maintain a clean image, the royal courts were often rife with pests, disease, and neglect in the parts of the palace that were not visible to the public eye. Personal hygiene was tied to the idea that a royal's image had to be a seamless blend of divinity and humanity, and that cleanliness was a reflection of that. It wasn't enough to simply be clean. The royals needed to appear immaculate to be noticed and admired for their effortless elegance. It was a way of saying, we are above the ordinary concerns of the common folk. And so cleaning became something more than just a necessity. It became a royal duty. Royalty had to maintain not just their personal hygiene, but also the appearance of cleanliness in their courts, where lavish displays of wealth and power needed to be visible at all times. However, behind the curtain of perfection, the royal obsession with cleanliness was also a way of addressing the fears of disease and the vulnerabilities that came with being part of an elaborate royal system. By meticulously maintaining a pristine image, the royal family and court could stave off the fears of death and disease that plagued the lower classes, who often lived in unsanitary conditions. This act of personal cleanliness wasn't just about health. It was about maintaining a facade that conveyed power control and superiority. For royalty, hygiene was an indispensable aspect of their life in the public eye, one that served to remind the masses of their lofty position. One of the most compelling aspects of hygiene for royalty was the belief that cleanliness was not only a reflection of health, but also of divine favor. Many royals, especially those of divine right, saw their physical bodies as vessels of their authority, reflecting the order and prosperity that their rule was supposed to bring to their lands. Their cleanliness was therefore symbolic of divine protection power and unblemished authority. As the centuries wore on, the connection between personal hygiene and political legitimacy continued to evolve. The act of cleanliness became an outward symbol of how one was fit to rule, a physical manifestation of one's superiority and right to govern. The royals, by maintaining their hygiene, reinforced their elevated place in society and used it as a tool to control the public's perception of their rule. In the end, hygiene practices in the royal courts were as much about the image they projected as they were about the physical state of cleanliness. The royals maintained cleanliness not just for their own health, but as an outward symbol of their position, power, and divine right to rule. By separating themselves from the lower classes, the nobility ensured their own status was untouchable, their image untarnished. It was an era where personal hygiene was a performance, a duty, and a luxury wrapped up in the glamour and mystique of royalty. And while the methods may seem strange or excessive to modern sensibilities, they laid the foundation for our contemporary understanding of the role of cleanliness in defining social status and identity. The royal obsession with hygiene helped shape the way society viewed cleanliness as an indicator of moral and social superiority, leaving a legacy that echoes through history and informs the expectations placed on those who hold power and influence today. The royals may have been clean on the outside, but the true cost of maintaining their image often lay in the intense and secretive world they inhabited. The tension between public cleanliness and private indulgence reflects not just the world of monarchy, but the human desire to create an image of purity, superiority, and invulnerability. An image that would stand the test of time, even as the real practices behind it remained hidden from view. In the grand sprawling city of Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, hygiene was a matter of royal pride and a symbol of the emperor's divine authority. The emperors of the Byzantine Empire, successors to the mighty Roman rulers, understood the power of image, cleanliness, and public health. But their approach to hygiene was far more intricate, influenced not only by their Roman roots, but also by the exotic and luxurious practices that were drawn from the far reaches of their vast empire. The Byzantine emperors, living in palatial luxury, had access to some of the most advanced hygiene practices of their time, setting them apart from the common people whose hygiene was far more rudimentary. The contrast between the nobility and the lower classes, however, wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about the emperor's ability to embody purity, power, and health qualities believed to come directly from divine favor. In the palatial complexes of the Byzantine emperors, one of the most important aspects of their daily routine was bathing. Bathhouses weren't just practical, they were statements of imperial power and luxury. The emperors had access to bathhouses far grander than anything their Roman predecessors had enjoyed, and these were meticulously designed to reflect their grandeur. Imagine stepping into one of these grand Byzantine bathhouses. Intricately detailed mosaics cover the walls, their vibrant colors catching the light of the flickering oil lamps. The marble floors gleam beneath your feet as warm, heated water flows through elaborate systems built beneath the floors, keeping the space comfortable in all seasons. These bathhouses weren't merely places to wash. They were centers of socialization, opulence, and divine cleanliness. The process of bathing was an event, a ritual meant to cleanse both the body and the spirit. The emperors, who often oversaw such bathhouses in their palaces, would be bathed in luxurious rooms attended to by a full staff. First, they would be carefully massaged with oils and scented creams products imported from the farthest reaches of the Byzantine Empire, including from regions like Egypt, Arabia, and Persia. These oils, often made from olives, lavender, and roses, would be carefully massaged into their skin, ensuring that their bodies were smooth, radiant, and free from the harshness of daily life. It was believed that the process of bathing, combined with the use of these oils and perfumes, helped to rejuvenate the body and elevate the emperor's status, signaling that he was divinely favored and protected from illness. While the grand bathhouses of the Byzantines were incredible, the emperors themselves were the focus of an even more refined personal hygiene regimen. No detail was too small. Every part of the emperor's appearance was meticulously maintained, from the gleam of his skin to the scent of his body. Personal care was of utmost importance to the emperor. Like the Roman emperors before them, Byzantine rulers were deeply concerned with maintaining a pristine image. But whereas the Romans had relied on simple oils and lotions, the Byzantine emperors took their grooming to new heights, incorporating luxurious perfumes, salves, and exotic oils into their daily routines. Perfume, especially, became an important symbol of the emperor's wealth and status. Unlike the common people who may have had access to rudimentary soaps and oils, the emperor could indulge in the finest scents, which were often imported from far-flung corners of the empire. These perfumes, derived from rare flowers, exotic spices, and even precious resins, were not only used to mask body odors, but also to symbolize purity, strength, and divinity. The emperors would have their clothes scented, their skin rubbed with fragrant oils, and their bathwater laced with luxurious scents to create an aura of invulnerability and power. It was said that some of these perfumes were so potent that they would fill a room with their scent for hours. The emperor's use of such rich fragrances was meant to signify not only cleanliness, but also their connection to the gods and their ability to transcend the filth of the mortal world. The hygiene practices of the Byzantine emperors were heavily influenced by their Roman heritage, particularly the Roman baths. However, the Byzantines added their own unique touch, drawing inspiration from the East and blending it with the grandeur of the Roman Empire. While Roman emperors had set the standard for personal hygiene, the Byzantines elevated this concept with more elaborate and refined techniques. One of the most important legacies of the Romans that the Byzantines inherited was their system of aqueducts and public baths. Like the Romans, the Byzantines understood the importance of clean water, and their bathhouses were fed by an advanced system of pipes and aqueducts that supplied them with fresh water. However, unlike the Romans, the Byzantines expanded this infrastructure to include more luxurious and private spaces for the emperor and his court. These grand bathhouses often featured multiple rooms for different purposes, including hot and cold pools, massage areas, and private chambers for the emperor. The concept of the public bathhouse, however, was retained, allowing ordinary citizens of Constantinople to enjoy the same water systems, though without the same opulence afforded to the emperor. Additionally, the use of Eastern ingredients in personal care and perfumes was a clear influence of the Byzantine Empire's far-reaching trade connections. Spices, oils, and fragrances from Egypt, Arabia, and Persia were incorporated into the daily grooming routines of the emperor and his court. These products weren't just about maintaining personal cleanliness. They were also a way for the emperor to assert his connection to the vast empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to the edges of Asia. The public health implications of Byzantine hygiene practices were profound. While the palace and the emperor's court had access to luxurious bathhouses and personal care products, the general population in Constantinople also benefited from the city's impressive infrastructure. In fact, the city boasted some of the most advanced public health systems in the ancient world. Public bathhouses, which were often large and ornate, were common throughout the city, providing the population with access to clean water and promoting personal hygiene. These bathhouses were often funded by the state and served as both social and hygienic hubs for the people. The role of public bathhouses in Constantinople was not just to promote cleanliness, but also to combat the spread of disease. With the constant flow of goods, people, and ideas through Constantinople's strategic location, the threat of epidemics was ever present. The Byzantines, aware of the connection between cleanliness and health, took steps to maintain their public baths and water systems, ensuring that they were clean and that the population had access to hygienic facilities. This attention to public hygiene, particularly the maintenance of clean water systems, was critical to the health of the empire, especially in a city as large and densely populated as Constantinople. For the emperor, hygiene was not just about health, it was about maintaining a divine image. The emperor's cleanliness and personal care were vital to how he was perceived by his subjects. In a world where disease was rampant and survival was often uncertain, the emperor's immaculate appearance symbolized not just his wealth and power, but also his divine protection. The emperor was seen as a godlike figure, and his cleanliness was a reflection of his purity and superiority. The emperor's hygiene practices helped to reinforce the idea that he was chosen by the gods to rule, and that his image, both physical and spiritual, was untarnished by the filth of everyday life. His personal care rituals were part of his royal performance, designed to demonstrate his divine right to rule and to maintain the loyalty and admiration of his subjects. The legacy of Byzantine hygiene practices left a lasting mark on the world. The sophisticated bathhouses, the focus on clean water, and the luxurious grooming rituals of the emperor set a standard for royal hygiene that would influence later empires and monarchs. The Byzantines understood the importance of cleanliness not only for health, but also for the emperor's image. Their emphasis on personal care and hygiene, paired with their advanced public health systems, ensured that Constantinople remained one of the most impressive cities of the ancient world. The Byzantine emperor's attention to hygiene in both public and private spheres was a symbol of his power, his connection to the divine, and his ability to transcend the common troubles of everyday life. Hygiene for the Byzantines was not merely about cleanliness, it was about control, about maintaining order and purity in a world that was often chaotic and dirty. The emperor, through his rituals and care for cleanliness, asserted his position as the ruler of a divine and orderly empire. In the grand scheme of history, the Byzantine hygiene practices were not just a reflection of the empire's wealth, but also of its cultural legacy. Hygiene was not merely a personal practice, it was a matter of imperial duty, and the emperors of Byzantium understood this better than anyone. The Byzantine Empire's commitment to personal cleanliness and public health helped shape not only their image, but the future of hygiene practices throughout the ancient and medieval worlds. As we've journeyed through the peculiar and extravagant hygiene practices of royalty throughout history, one thing becomes strikingly clear. These practices, though strange and often unsanitary by modern standards, reflect much more than mere personal habits. They offer a glimpse into the opulence, cultural values, and contradictions that defined royal life. Hygiene in the world of kings and queens wasn't just about staying clean. It was a symbol of wealth, power, and divine favor. Royals indulged in practices that seem utterly bizarre to us today, yet they believed these luxuries were essential to maintaining their status and health. From the wine baths of Mary Queen of Scots, to the peculiar use of perfume, to mask body odor in Versailles royalty's hygiene habits tell us a great deal about their world. At the heart of these royal practices lies a fascinating contradiction. Cleanliness was often associated with virtue and divine favor, something that made kings and queens appear closer to the gods. A healthy and immaculate ruler was seen as a reflection of the health and prosperity of the kingdom. Yet despite this emphasis on cleanliness as a virtue, many royal hygiene practices were neither sanitary nor practical. Perfumes, powders, and lavish oils were often used in place of actual cleanliness, and public baths, though luxurious, were sometimes breeding grounds for disease. For example, while the sultans of the Ottoman Empire had their magnificent bathhouses, they often relied on scented oils and frequent baths to cover up the lack of soap and proper water filtration. And Louis XIV, whose lavish Versailles Palace had an inadequate sewage system, masked the unsanitary conditions with overwhelming perfumes. These practices, meant to symbolize purity, were ironically built on a foundation of impractical hygiene and a disregard for the basic principles of cleanliness. What these bizarre and often unsanitary habits reveal about royalty is a fundamental disconnect between appearance and reality. While they projected health, purity, and divine status, many of their hygiene practices were based on extravagant indulgences rather than effective cleanliness. This stark contrast between royal self-care and the realities of personal hygiene for the common folk highlights the divide between the elite and the lower classes. The nobility had access to the finest perfumes, oils, and bathhouses, while the common people struggled with basic hygiene due to the lack of resources and sanitation infrastructure. As we reflect on these royal contradictions, it's important to recognize that hygiene practices, while often absurd, were deeply intertwined with the social and cultural values of their time. They represented not only the wealth and power of a ruler, but also their need to project an image of invulnerability and purity to their subjects. In a world without modern sanitation and medical understanding, the royal body became a symbol of divine protection and authority, even if the practices that maintained it were anything but hygienic. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Which royal hygiene practice did you find the most surprising, or perhaps even repulsive? Was it the wine baths of Mary, Queen of Scots, or perhaps the use of urine in ancient Rome? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating historical insights. In our next video, we'll delve into more quirky and often shocking practices from the past. Who knows what bizarre habits we'll uncover next? Stay tuned